What if I told you that the staggering billions pouring into artificial intelligence right now are masking a much darker and more profound systemic realignment of the global economy? We are watching the architecture of human civilization being rewired in real time, and the vast majority of investors are standing directly on the tracks of an oncoming high-speed train. The explosive headline numbers and the dizzying public offerings are blinding the public to the deeply unstable foundational shifts happening just beneath the surface of the market. Hello, this is WarmInsight. Today we're going to talk about the AI's ascendant era, strategic opportunities, and the systemic challenges that define our current reality. Leaving a like and subscribing is a huge help to us to truly understand the absolute magnitude of the current financial and technological landscape. We must entirely discard our conventional models of incremental growth. We are no longer dealing with simple year-over-year software updates or standard product cycles. We are currently caught in the powerful grip of an economic tsunami that is aggressively sweeping away the old world order of the technology sector. The immense scale of this momentum can only be comprehended when we look at the sheer velocity of the capital flows currently flooding the market. We are witnessing record-breaking public offerings, such as the astounding $5.55 billion Cerebra's debut, which shattered even the most optimistic expectations. Simultaneously, we are seeing massive, almost incomprehensible early-stage capital deployments, exemplified by the $1.1 billion seed round for Ineffable Intelligence, a company barely months old. This is not normal market behavior. This is the financial equivalent of a gold rush, where rational valuation metrics are entirely suspended in favor of absolute, unfiltered speculation in the desperate pursuit of foundational technological dominance. But to grasp the true danger and the hidden opportunities of this moment, we must look backward through the lens of history. If we examine the British railway mania of the 1840s, we see a psychological and economic pattern that perfectly mirrors our current situation. Back then, the revolutionary promise of the steam locomotive captured the collective imagination of the British public. The idea that you could cross the country in a matter of hours instead of days was as mind-bending to them as artificial general intelligence is to us today. This paradigm-shifting technology triggered a massive speculative frenzy. Parliament authorized thousands of miles of new tracks, and ordinary citizens, from factory workers to aristocrats, poured their entire life savings into newly formed railway companies. They bought shares simply because they saw the prices going up every single day. This was the exact same herd mentality, the exact same fear of missing out that we are seeing right now, with retail investors blindly throwing money at any startup with the letters AI in its name. However, the reality of building a railway was vastly more complex and expensive than the public understood. Mountains had to be blasted, massive steel bridges had to be constructed, and vast amounts of coal had to be burned. When the sheer physical and financial costs of this infrastructure finally caught up with the speculative hype, the bubble violently burst. Fortunes were completely wiped out overnight. Yet when the dust finally settled, the tracks remained. The infrastructure that was built during that chaotic frenzy went on to power the Industrial Revolution and reshape the entire global economy for a century. Today we are in the exact same phase. The billions being poured into semiconductor chips, vast server farms, and deep learning algorithms are the new steel tracks and steam engines. The bubble will inevitably face a brutal correction, but the foundational AI infrastructure being laid down right now will unequivocally dictate the winners and losers of the next 100 years. The strategic investor understands that the goal is not to chase the speculative phantom, but to own the underlying infrastructure that survives the eventual crash. This brings us to the profound macroeconomic and geopolitical forces currently driving this market. This is no longer merely a battle between rival Silicon Valley corporations. It has escalated into a full-blown international arms race. Nations are openly vying for technological supremacy, recognizing that whoever controls the most advanced artificial intelligence will fundamentally dictate global trade, military strategy, and economic leverage. We can clearly observe this high-stakes maneuvering when figures like NVIDIA chief executive Jensen Huang make highly publicized appearances during critical diplomatic visits, such as Donald Trump's recent engagements in China. These are not casual business meetings. These are strategic summits, acknowledging that advanced semiconductors have become the single, most critical strategic resource on the planet. They are the new oil, the new uranium, and the absolute cornerstone of national security. This intense global demand is creating a massive inflationary pressure point. When you hear reports of jumping inflation figures, it is crucial to understand that the insatiable appetite for AI hardware, specialized engineering talent, and the massive raw materials required to build data centers is fundamentally driving up costs across the entire global supply chain. Central banks are closely monitoring this phenomenon, and the persistent inflationary pressure generated by the AI boom could very well force them to maintain higher interest rates for a significantly longer period than the market currently anticipates. This creates a deeply complex environment for investors, where the growth narrative of AI is constantly colliding with the reality of restrictive monetary policy. To fully grasp the geopolitical tension surrounding this technology, we must look back to the intense paranoia and the massive state-sponsored investments of the Cold War space race. During the 1950s and 60s, when the Soviet Union successfully launched the Sputnik satellite, it triggered a massive visceral shockwave throughout the United States. It was an undeniable demonstration of technological capability that instantly translated into an existential military threat. The American response was not just a scientific endeavor, it was a total mobilization of national resources, culminating in the creation of NASA and the Apollo program. The government poured billions into aerospace, engineering, computer science, and advanced materials, recognizing that losing the race for space meant losing the global balance of power. The modern race for artificial general intelligence is the exact same dynamic, but playing out on an exponentially faster timeline. The algorithmic breakthroughs and the massive semiconductor foundries are the new launch pads and rockets. Nations are frantically attempting to secure supply chains, impose aggressive export controls, and forge strategic alliances to ensure they are not left behind. In this new intellectual arms race, the investor who fails to view the AI sector through this intense geopolitical lens is missing the most critical driver of capital allocation in the modern era. You are not just investing in software, you are investing in the sovereign defense capabilities of the 21st century. But there is a massive, looming physical barrier to this limitless digital expansion, and it is a barrier that the market is dangerously underestimating. Artificial intelligence, for all its ethereal and abstract qualities, is entirely dependent on brute, physical energy. The computational power required to train and run these massive advanced models is staggering, and it is growing at an exponential rate. We are no longer talking about simple rows of servers in a cooled room. We are talking about colossal, sprawling data centers that demand the uninterrupted power output of entire mid-sized cities. The physical limits of the electrical grid are rapidly becoming the primary bottleneck for technological progress. We recently saw a stark example of this with the high-profile lawsuit surrounding Elon Musk's company, xAI. In a desperate bid to power their massive new supercomputer cluster, the company deployed unregulated gas turbines, completely bypassing the local utility grid. This is a massive warning sign. It highlights an impending collision between the insatiable energy demands of the technology sector and the physical limitations of our current infrastructure, not to mention the escalating environmental concerns. As the carbon footprint of these massive AI operations grows, they will inevitably attract fierce regulatory scrutiny. We are going to see aggressive new environmental taxes, strict power consumption limits, and a desperate, incredibly lucrative scramble to develop sustainable high-capacity energy solutions, specifically designed for data centers. To understand the magnitude of this impending environmental and regulatory clash, we can draw a direct parallel to the rapid expansion of coal power. During the height of the British Industrial Revolution, in the relentless pursuit of mechanized production, factories burned massive, unprecedented quantities of coal, completely ignoring the environmental consequences. This relentless consumption culminated in the infamous Great Smog of London. In 1952, a catastrophic environmental event that darkened the skies, halted the city, and caused thousands of deaths. The public outrage was so immense that it forced the government to enact the Clean Air Act, imposing strict new regulations that fundamentally changed how industries operated and consumed energy. The artificial intelligence industry is rapidly approaching its own great smog moment. The invisible pollution is the massive strain on global power grids and the explosive growth in carbon emissions from these digital factories. When the inevitable regulatory backlash arrives, it will severely impact the operational costs and the unchecked growth of companies that have not prioritized energy efficiency. This is exactly why the smartest institutional money is currently quietly diversifying away from pure software plays and heavily investing in grid modernization, advanced nuclear technologies, and next-generation clean energy solutions. They understand that you cannot sustain the brain of artificial intelligence without radically upgrading the heart of the global power grid. While retail investors are mesmerized by the flashing lights of new startups, we must carefully observe the calculated, often brutal maneuvers of the established technology titans. Consider the incredibly revealing paradox currently unfolding at Cisco. This is a massive, deeply entrenched networking giant that recently saw its stock price surge 15% strictly on the back of surging orders for artificial intelligence infrastructure. Yet, in the exact same moment, they are celebrating record demand. They announce the elimination of nearly 4,000 jobs. To the casual observer, this seems like a complete contradiction. Why would a company experiencing massive growth suddenly execute such severe layoffs? To the seasoned institutional strategist, however, this is a clear demonstration of ruthless, necessary operational realignment. Cisco is aggressively shedding the burdensome weight of legacy divisions and outdated business models to violently funnel every available dollar of capital into the high-growth, highly specialized AI segments. This is not an isolated incident. This is the defining survival mechanism of the current era. The major players are cannibalizing their own traditional operations to feed the artificial intelligence engine. They understand that if they do not pivot with absolute conviction, they will be entirely obsolete within a decade. This brutal transition from legacy systems to advanced automation mirrors the deeply painful transition from artisan labor to mechanized production in the early 19th century, when power looms and advanced spinning frames were introduced into the textile industry. They promised massive increases in productivity and tremendous wealth for the factory owners. However, this progress came at the direct expense of the highly skilled artisan weavers whose generational livelihoods were instantly destroyed by the new machines. This massive displacement of labor led to the furious Luddite rebellions, where desperate workers violently smashed the machines that were replacing them. Today, we are witnessing a digital white-collar version of this exact same industrial upheaval. The massive job cuts at companies like Cisco, even amidst record profits, are the modern equivalent of replacing the hand weavers with the automated loom. The technology giants are relentlessly stripping away human labor wherever it can be replaced or made redundant by intelligent systems, prioritizing capital efficiency and foundational AI growth above all else. As investors, we must ruthlessly align our capital with the companies that are successfully executing this painful but necessary evolution, avoiding the sluggish legacy businesses that are stubbornly clinging to outdated models of operation. We must now turn our attention to the darkest and most pressing systemic threat in this new landscape, which is the massive, terrifying escalation of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. The integration of artificial intelligence into every layer of corporate and government infrastructure has inadvertently created the largest and most complex attack surface in human history. We are no longer dealing with simple phishing emails or basic malware. We are entering a terrifying new era, where highly sophisticated artificial intelligence is being weaponized to attack other artificial intelligence systems. We are seeing the rise of automated, recursive cyber attacks that can identify vulnerabilities, rewrite their own code, and penetrate defenses faster than any human security team could ever hope to respond. Organizations like Palo Alto Networks are issuing dire, urgent warnings that the global cyber threat level is not just temporarily elevated, it is permanently critical. This is a shadow war being fought in real time across the global network. A single, well-executed breach of a foundational AI system could easily cripple critical national infrastructure, expose the private data of millions, and instantly erase billions of dollars in shareholder value. This massive systemic risk cannot be ignored. It necessitates a complete paradigm shift in how corporations allocate their budgets, cybersecurity is no longer viewed as an optional back-office expense. It is now a critical, non-negotiable element of basic enterprise survival. For every single dollar a company spends on developing new artificial intelligence capabilities, a significant mandatory percentage must now be spent on defending those systems. This creates an incredibly powerful, virtually guaranteed growth vector for elite cybersecurity firms, turning a terrifying global threat into a highly lucrative, strategic investment opportunity for those who understand the new battlefield. This relentless digital shadow war bears a striking and highly instructive resemblance to the golden age of piracy in the early 18th century, as European empires began to establish massive, highly lucrative global trade routes across the oceans. They generated unprecedented wealth, Spanish galleons laden with silver, and British merchant ships carrying valuable spices crossed the globe, fueling the early modern economy. However, this massive accumulation of unprotected wealth, sailing across the open ocean, inevitably attracted a highly skilled, ruthless breed of opportunistic predators. The pirates of the Caribbean were not just disorganized criminals. They were sophisticated, highly adaptable syndicates that specifically targeted the vulnerabilities of the massive, slow-moving merchant fleets. The economic damage they inflicted became so incredibly severe that it threatened the very stability of the empires. In response, the British government was forced to completely change its strategy. They could no longer just build merchant ships. They had to massively invest in the absolute dominance of the Royal Navy, deploying heavily armed warships to aggressively hunt down the pirates and secure the global trade routes. The massive cybersecurity companies of today are the modern equivalent of those heavily armed naval fleets, as the global economy becomes entirely dependent on the safe passage of digital data and artificial intelligence models. The sophisticated hackers and state-sponsored cybercriminals are the new pirates, relentlessly attacking the vulnerabilities of the system. The institutional capital flowing into cybersecurity right now is the modern equivalent of building an impenetrable digital navy, making these defense-oriented companies an absolute necessity in any forward-looking investment portfolio. Navigating this incredibly volatile landscape requires mastering the profound psychological tension that currently dictates the market. We are trapped in a violent daily tug-of-war between extreme greed and overwhelming fear. The greed is constantly fueled by the undeniable, visible success of foundational companies like NVIDIA and the intoxicating utopian promises of limitless productivity and unimaginable wealth creation. Retail investors are desperately throwing money at the market, terrified of missing out on the next generational leap. However, this frantic optimism is heavily shadowed by a deep, pervasive current of institutional fear. Smart money is deeply anxious about the persistent, stubborn inflation figures, the escalating geopolitical instability, the massive energy constraints, and the constant, terrifying threat of a catastrophic cyber attack. This intensely bifurcated sentiment creates a highly unstable market environment, extremely susceptible to violent, sudden swings. A single positive announcement about a new language model can send entire sectors soaring into the stratosphere, while a simple rumor of increased regulatory scrutiny can trigger a massive, brutal sell-off. To survive and build lasting wealth in this chaotic environment, the Titan's Playbook recommends a highly disciplined, structurally sound approach known as the 70-20-10 asset allocation model. This strategy requires placing 70% of your capital into diversified, high-quality equities, heavily biased toward the foundational technology sector. This means aggressively targeting broad semiconductor exchange-traded funds, massive cloud computing infrastructure providers, and elite cybersecurity firms. These are the companies selling the picks and shovels in the current gold rush. The next 20% must be firmly anchored in incredibly safe, highly stable assets to act as a massive shock absorber. When the inevitable volatility strikes, finally, the remaining 10% must be held in highly liquid cash. This cash reserve is your strategic ammunition, allowing you to aggressively buy high-quality assets at a massive discount when panic inevitably sweeps through the market and causes temporary irrational price collapses. Furthermore, the most critical survival mechanism in a market, this unpredictable, is the absolute adherence to dollar-cost averaging. By systematically investing a fixed amount of money at perfectly regular intervals, regardless of whether the market is up or down, you completely remove the destructive, highly emotional urge to perfectly time the market. This disciplined strategy forces you to buy more shares when prices are painfully low, and fewer shares when valuations become dangerously stretched and irrational. You must aggressively avoid the seductive, highly dangerous siren song of massive rallies in highly speculative, completely unprofitable artificial intelligence startups. These are the modern equivalent of the doomed dot-com companies from the late 1990s. The current hype cycle is generating extreme, entirely unjustified valuations that are completely detached from any fundamental economic reality. As we look forward into the coming decades, we must constantly remind ourselves that true, generational value creation is a slow, methodical process that unfolds over many years, not in a matter of days or weeks. The deafening daily noise of the stock market often obscures the slow, quiet, enduring signal of actual technological progress. We are truly living through a massive transformative era that will rival the birth of the personal computer and the massive global rollout of the internet. There will absolutely be spectacular failures. There will be terrifying bubbles that burst and wipe out the unprepared. And there will be moments of intense, overwhelming market panic. However, the long-term, undeniable arc of human innovation remains clearly pointed upward. The investors who ultimately win, the ones who secure true, lasting generational wealth, will be those who can calmly see past the immediate, frantic hype. They will be the ones who deeply understand the massive, underlying flows of global capital, the physical realities of energy, consumption, and the absolute necessity of impenetrable digital security. These are the true, foundational drivers of this incredible new frontier, and aligning your capital with these undeniable realities is the only true path forward.